So we're going to now continue to travel into the past, but with an important twist. So as a short, very short introduction to our next guest, I want to remind us that cities are populated as much by unrealized architectural projects as realized ones. Zaki just showed us the extraordinary Louvre, Abu Dhabi. But in a sense, behind every time you see an important, historically significant, iconic or non-iconic piece of architecture, often there are 100 ghosts behind them of all the buildings and all the projects that never did happen. And Abu Dhabi and Dubai are no exception in this matter. Seminal architects were responsible for ambitious plans which never materialized, but whose drawings outline fascinating alternative histories and futures. So a few words about our next guests. Ahmed and Rashid bin Shabib are cultural advisors to His Excellency, the Minister of State, Zaki Nusebi, at the Office of Public and Cultural Diplomacy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. That's a mouthful. We need to work on the acronyms. Ahmed and Rashid both hold degrees from the University of Oxford in geography and urbanism. And many of you will know their work, certainly for the last 10, 11 years, as publishers of Brown Book. And I think that was a very important project that links very closely, I think, to what Zaki was talking about, and even what Hans-Ulrich was talking about, the importance of not forgetting these centers of Arab culture, whether it's Kuwait or in Palestine, or even extraordinary Baghdad, Tehran, etc., etc. I think this has formed a very, very important corpus on the history of Arab urbanism over the last 50, 60 years. So will you please join me now in welcoming Rashid bin Shabib. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Shimon, and thank you for His Excellency and, of course, the Ambassador. So this is a really exciting time. I have 50 slides in 15 minutes, so I'm going to try to figure out how I'm going to do this. But as Shimon mentioned, our interest really lies with the field of urbanism. And what I want to do is try to tie back what the past was specifically to what it is currently. And I think a lot of people imagine what Saadiyat Island or all of these different islands, how is it connected to the past? And I really want to try to build a narrative around the role of Sheikh Zayed and his role as a nation builder. And really the importance of how he gathered people together in building a form of social gathering, but really his interest in civic space, institutional capacity, and of course nation building. So it's critical to really understand the role of His Highness Sheikh Zayed's late legacy in the role of culture and tying that back in. And I think he's influenced most of our lives, but specifically what I would like to cover is his role in Saadiyat Island. And I think that vision came about from the very beginning. I think what people tend to imagine is that Saadiyat Island and the Louvre specifically comes out of nowhere, or it's just a project that was just realized last year, or a decade's worth of effort. But the reality of it is it stems far back when the UAE started, or even further before. And the late Sheikh Zayed's role in developing the urban fabric was very much hands-on. He was very much interested in trying to understand the built environment, but also learn from others. So he was a person that was very curious in learning how the built environment is, hands-on, taking people's advice, and being on site to realize what these projects are. And this is a very important picture to me specifically. It's not necessarily looking at the built environment, but looking at the environment with the built environment. And I think that is critical, the nature element of his late vision in the built environment. And of course, civic buildings and his active role in trying to imagine how these civic spaces would be and how it would serve the people and how it comes about. And of course, I'd like to mention Dr. Abdurrahman Makhlouf, who was very much hands-on in the planning process, where he was side by side with the late Sheikh Zayed and trying to imagine what these public spaces are and how they're realized. Again, showing you pictures of him consulting, getting advice, understanding the environment, and trying to make this realized. So these are more of him looking at plans. So I'd like to take a moment just to talk about Dr. Takahashi, who was one of the first master planners of Abu Dhabi. He graduated from Columbia University, and he came about from the Japanese ambassador in Kuwait, where he graduated again from Columbia, living in New York, and tried to reimagine what Abu Dhabi was to be. And he really believed in the grid system and reimagined how, in a sense, this piece of land that was surrounded by the ocean and along with many islands, how this would come about. And he worked closely with Sheikh Zayed to realize this vision. But in particular, there are endless sketches of his work, and I highly advise that you research a bit about Takahashi. And I see Chiho over there, who helped us a lot with the research, trying to realize it. And, but again, the public spaces played such an active role in it. So again, I'd like to take a moment to speak about Henry Kolbeck and the Zayed Theater, the Zayed Sports Stadium. This is a very important project because what it is in the early 70s, one of the most iconic architectural projects that was realized in Abu Dhabi was central within the mainland of Abu Dhabi. It was iconic, it was a civic space, it brought people together, and that was one of the priorities within this type of project. And this is quite iconic, and I think it still lives on today, so I highly recommend that you visit it, and it's quite unique. But again, the point that I'd like to make is one of the most iconic buildings had that social gathering element, that had that public space, and I think that was really important. And again, when you start to imagine what the Louvre is today compared to the ideas of the past, I don't think it's that distant. And it's on the 200 dirham note if people didn't notice. So. Yes, to go back to Saadiyat Island, and I'd like to keep coming back to it because I think it's a really critical point to look at the past and how does that connect to the future. And specifically, Saadiyat Island is a thought pattern that comes together as a project with different mixed uses, cultural, of course, arts, living, institutional, educational, when it comes together. So I'd like to take this opportunity to further expand on the notion of islands. This is something that's not foreign to the UAE. And I'd like to talk about three specific projects. One is called the Sea Garden Island project by Cedric Price. I'd like to talk about Lulu Island, designed by Oscar Niemeyer, and then the Deira Island by Rima and Rahel Patel, which I think are three critical projects. So the first is Cedric Price's project, which is called the Abu Dhabi Sea Garden project. And it's, I see Hans really excited about it. But Cedric Price, of course, is a, wait, let me get my notes. Of course, they are lost. So back to Cedric Price. So he's considered one of the most prominent thinkers in the field of architecture. He was an educator and of course worked for Jane Drew and Maxwell Fry and Goldfinger, but really provoked a lot of thoughts. He didn't realize many projects, of course, for those that have been to Regent Zoo. He has the Birdcage, which is a fantastic project. He had the Fun Palace. But he, in the early 70s, I think, proposed a project called the Abu Dhabi Sea Garden project, which is this unique kind of, this is a kind of portrait picture of how he imagined this. But it was a man-made island proposed off the coast of Abu Dhabi, and the idea that it would have different mixed uses, but it was mostly for leisure. And again, coming back to this notion of public space, where boats would moor, you'd have a park, you'd have recreational spaces, you would have an aqua club, you'd have different public uses. And I think this is really important to think about such a daring and bold project. This is not so distant from what the Saadiyat Island is today. Back in the 70s, for them to try to imagine such a project is very original, but not very distant from His Highness's vision. And I think this is a very critical project that needs to be studied. The second project that I'd like to talk about is the Oscar Niemeyer project that started in 76, but really came about in 81. Of course, for those that are familiar with Oscar Niemeyer, he's a Brazilian architect, well known all over the world for his modernist projects, specifically in key projects in the Middle East and Algiers. And he also proposed a lot of projects in Saudi and the UAE, but were never realized. Specifically, he really concentrated on Lulu Island, which is that piece of land over there, not very distant from Saadiyat and the main island. And his project was really important because the way he imagined was this huge monorail that would go through the city, and then there would be different recreational projects. So you'd have a cultural center, a zoo, a residential elderly complex, and an island. So you can see this kind of walkway that goes in the middle, right up. Oh, there's a laser. So this is so you'd walk onto this plot, and then you'd see animals on the bottom. This would be underwater, and this would be underwater. I don't know how he imagined this project to be, but it was quite daring. But of course, social welfare was very much central into this into his policy, and I think it was shaped by the agenda. Different public spaces. He imagined different civic spaces, desert island yachts. And so these are very unique, again, when you think about that type of project and that scale. It's very original and quite unique. And the last project is one specifically in Dubai. It was designed by Rael and Rima Patela in the 80s. Of course, this is a Team X photograph where all of the most prominent architects at that time created a collective, and they were part of that, and they really pushed forward against that. So this was the project that was proposed. It was called the Deira Seafront Project, and this is the creek front, this is Shindaga, this is Al Fahedi area, and then you had these different projects. So they really imagined this project to be an extension of the city where it would expand and connect to this type of land. These are more scaled images. You'd see an access to this. It was kind of, in a sense, a Venetian or a waterfront project. I don't know what they were thinking, but it was really interesting. This is a close-up to the model. Oh, sorry, can you? Oh, maybe people missed half of it. And so you can see the different mixed uses within the project. And so these were all waterfront projects. They proposed a mosque as well and a sports stadium. And it was quite daring at that time and in the 80s to propose such an island. And when you think about Palm Island and those types of projects, it's not so distant from this ideology. So I'd like to go back to Saadiyat Island and conclude on my 50th slide. The fact that how distant is this image, or the late Sheikh Zayed's perspective on creating a civic space that celebrates culture, that allows people to come together, to the different projects, and or specifically the Louvre, designed by John Novell. How different is John Novell from Cedric Price or Oscar Niemeyer or Rael and Rima Patela? And I think this is such an important point, that we are not deviating that far away from the late Sheikh Zayed's vision. Or in essence, or most importantly, we're continuing his legacy, specifically on the cultural front. And I think this is an important point to set. So really connecting the past and the future. And I'm happy to answer any questions later on if anybody has any. So thank you very much.